Our first witness is the terminal superintendent. Mr. Lakin, did you hear my reading of the notice of charges?
Yes, I did.
Did you file those charges?
I most certainly did.
Then I would like to ask you to explain what caused you to file those charges.
I have a prepared statement here that I'd like to read to you.
Proceed.
On March 30th, the Lieutenant Special Services and I found the claimant asleep on a bench in the switchman's locker room. I had been searching for the accused for about an hour and a half. We went into the switchman's locker room while searching. We came around the corner of some of the lockers and found the accused sleeping on a bench. I called his name 2 or 3 times. He did not respond. In order to awaken him, I had to shake his right leg. He woke up startled, and I asked him to sit up, and he told me he couldn't sit up just then. It would take a couple of minutes before he could wake up. I talked to him and asked him 2 or 3 times to sit up. I wanted to talk to him, and he never did respond until he was ready to sit up. I'd been looking for the accused because he had failed to perform the duties assigned to his job. He didn't clean the inside of the building. He didn't empty the trash cans. None of the accumulation of dust and dirt on the windows and the seals and the doors had been taken care of. I noticed that none of these things had been done. I hadn't seen the accused since about 1 p.m., and I thought he had abandoned his position and walked off his job. This place was a mess inside and out because no one had been doing the cleaning for several weeks. No one had been assigned to the janitor's position for some time until the accused was called from the extra board to help us get the cleaning under control. There was a lot of things to do. I issued written instructions explaining all the things that needed to be done. The accused did not do what he was assigned. Sure, he cut some grass, but it wasn't even enough to fill a small grocery bag. The people that do these jobs shouldn't have to be told what they have to do every day. The bulletin listed enough of the daily duties to keep the accused busy without my having to issue a list of specifics.
Very well. Mr. Lakin, did you hear me read into the record a copy of the job bulletin which covers Mr. Blanton's position?
Yes.
Could you please explain to me whether or not that bulletin is posted, and if it is, where I could find it?
Yes, it's posted in the central office. It's also in our books, and every employee is supposed to read them.
And you mentioned that you, when you finally did find Mr. Blanton after an hour or so, you found him sleeping. Is sleeping...
Objection, Mr. Hearing Officer.
Mr. Hollis, I will be glad to hear your objection, but I would like to ask my question of the witness and allow him to answer, and then I will hear any objection that you wanted.
Well, the objection is in regard to the question that you're asking. We heard for the first time the charging officer go introduce an argument of sleeping, and now you're asking questions about sleeping. The organization objected to the charge letter because there were no specific charges listed against the claimant. So we would object to the line of question regarding sleeping. Mr. Blanton was not charged with sleeping.
Mr. Hollis, your objection is noted for the record. Again, to reiterate, the purpose of these proceedings here today is to develop all of the facts in the case. As it turns out, Mr. Lakin was the one who found Mr. Blanton, and so his testimony is relevant, and I will allow him to proceed with his testimony.
So that the record is noted with our objection.
Your objection is noted for the record. Mr. Lakin, when you finally did find Mr. Blanton, what position was he in?
He was horizontal. He was laying on a bench, sound asleep.
And is sleeping permitted while on duty?
No, and actually, if you'll read the bulletin that was entered into evidence, that's not one of his duties.
And when you thought that Mr. Blanton had actually abandoned his job, is that because it took you so long to find him?
Absolutely, and it really disturbed me that this man would betray my trust in him to do his duties that day.
Mr. Lakin, had he been outside cutting the grass and performing his duties like he was supposed to do, would you have been able to see him a lot more clearly?
Yeah, had he been outside, I mean, I've seen a little evidence where he cut a small patch of grass, but Had he been outside doing his job, I definitely would have seen him.
What if he'd have been in the locker room?
Objection, Mr. Hearing Officer. You're asking questions that require nothing but assumption from Mr. Lakin. We have a charge letter, as vague as it is. We've heard his testimony. Your line of question to lead him to the assumption of what Mr. Blanton may or may not have been doing is totally inappropriate.
Mr. Hollis, your objection is noted for the record, but again, in order to develop all of the facts of this case, I'm simply trying to ascertain why it took so long for the superintendent to find the accused, and if he had been doing some other things rather than being in a horizontal position with his eyes closed, could he have been found quicker, and we could have avoided all of this confusion, and none of us may be here today. So I believe this line of questioning is relevant, and I will proceed. Mr. Lakin, again, so you had thought that maybe the accused had abandoned his job, and you were searching for him for and just an inordinate amount of time. Had he been actively working and cleaning up, would he have been easier to find then?
Oh, yes, I would have heard him. I would have seen evidence of his work. He would have been much easier to find.
Okay. I think that takes care of all the questions I have of the superintendent. At this time, I thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to attend the hearing. And with that said, I would ask the union, do you have any questions of the superintendent?
Yes, I do. So, Mr. Lakin, it was your decision to call Mr. Blanton for the janitor position on the date in question. Is that correct?
That's correct. We
Thank
needed
you.
someone.
The next question.
Excuse me, Mr. Hollis, I believe that Mr. Lakin was trying to answer your question, and I don't believe you allowed him to completely answer the question, and I would appreciate it if you would allow him to complete his sentence before you move on with your next question.
With all due respect, Mr. Hearing Officer, the question was a yes or no question, and he answered it. I didn't ask for any assumption or any type of explanation, just a yes or no.
Well, Mr. Hollis, with all due respect, I'll decide what kind of question that was. And in order to find clarification and to make sure that the accused gets a full, fair, and impartial hearing in this case, we need to hear all of the evidence that all witnesses need to present. With that said, Mr. Lakin, would you complete answering the union's question?
Could you ask that question again? I'm sorry.
You've already answered that question, so the next question. The position had not been filled for a few weeks, was your testimony. Is that correct?
Yeah, it had been a little while since somebody had worked that job.
Okay. And your position as superintendent, as the hearing officer said, you have a busy schedule. So your position of superintendent does not require you to work side by side with the janitor throughout his day. Is that correct?
No, that's why I put out this bulletin.
Okay. So during your observation with the lieutenant, your observation of Mr. Blanton, did you ask him about any of his duties for that day?
I knew what his duties was. Why should I ask him about his duties?
Okay, so I want to rephrase the question. During your observation, you did not ask Mr. Blanton about any of his duties for that day, correct?
No, I didn't. I've seen what he was doing.
Okay. The organization doesn't have any further questions of Mr. Lakin at this time, subject to recall.
Mr. Lakin, I need some clarification. As far as asking someone about their duties, is that something you would normally do, or do you expect that the employees would read the job bulletin and know what their duties are?
I expect them to read the job bulletin, to know what their duties are, and furthermore, I expect them to fulfill their duty.
Do you expect to ask any of your employees under your charge about their duties?
No, never.
And yet, the union would like us to believe for some reason that Mr. Blanton deserves special treatment, and that you should have asked him. Do you agree with that?
No, I do not, but I had provided him with a bulletin.
Therefore, he...
Objection for the record, Mr. Hearing Officer. The organization doesn't want you to believe anything. We asked questions that were yes or no, and the questions were answered. So you are adding assumption to our line of questioning, which is inappropriate.
Your objection is noted for the record. Again, Mr. Lakin, just for clarification purposes, did you provide a bulletin which outlined all of the instructions pertaining to Mr. Blanton's duties?
Yes, I did.
Are employees expected to read that bulletin?
Yes, he was expected to read that bulletin and follow the instructions provided on it.
Is it further expected that if employees don't understand the instructions or have questions, that they should ask?
He could have come to me at any time. I would have gladly answered his questions.
Very good. I have no further questions. Mr. Lakin, the union has requested that you remain outside in case of recall, so I would ask that you kindly step out, but make yourself available. And again, the instructions are to not discuss this case outside of this room.
Thank you.
At this time, I will next call the Lieutenant of Special Services to Davis Yard, Emily Pantoja. Thank you, Ms. Pantoja. Thank you for your attendance at this hearing. In your own words, could you please explain to me the events of April 2nd involving Mr. Blanton?
Yes, so Davis Yard is under my jurisdiction. Sometime prior to 3:45 on that date, the superintendent of terminals requested that I go with him to hunt down the accused. He said the accused had been missing for some time and he did not know where he was. So I accompanied the super and we went to the switchman's wash and locker room, and we found the accused lying on his back asleep on a bench in the washroom. We stood there for a few minutes and the super shook him by the foot to wake him up. He asked him how long he had been there, and the accused said that he had been there for about 40 minutes, lying there asleep. I remember that the superintendent asked the accused to get up, and he said he wanted to lay there for a few more minutes, and he said he was sick. He said he got hot while inspecting the grounds and supervising the groundskeeping crew, and he came over there to cool off and just lay down, and he went to sleep. So at about 3:45 p.m., the super took him out of service, and I escorted him back to his car and escorted him off the property. We didn't speak to the accused until the super shook his leg and called his name. He was groggy, but I didn't notice anything physically wrong with him. He could have been under the influence of drugs or some other intoxicant. I don't know.
Very well. Let me just ask you a few things. How long did Mr. Blanton say that he had been lying asleep on the bench?
About 40 minutes.
And you previously stated that when the superintendent woke Mr. Blanton up, you heard him say he was sick. Did he ask for any medical assistance?
No.
And as you escorted him off the property, did he ask you to take him to the doctor or give him a ride to the hospital?
No.
If Mr. Blanton had requested medical assistance, would you and the company have provided such?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. At this time, I have no further questions. Does the union have any questions of Lieutenant Pantoja?
I do. Thank you, Lieutenant. Just a couple of questions. On the day in question, your only involvement with Mr. Blanton was when the superintendent asked you to accompany him. Is that correct?
That's correct. We couldn't find him.
Okay. And it was your testimony that Mr. Blanton stated he did not feel well when he was approached by the superintendent, and it was your observation that Mr. Blanton appeared groggy. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. No further questions at this time. So we reserve the right to recall.
Ms. Pantoja, just a couple of follow-up questions. I want to be absolutely clear about something. When you found the accused asleep on the bench, or rather, during your search for the accused, did you find him cleaning any offices, storerooms, locker rooms, or passenger stations?
No.
Did you find him working in the grounds, cutting grass, or anything else?
No.
Did you find him handling any bags?
No, he was asleep.
Did you find him replacing any posters at Davis Yard or the passenger station?
No.
Very well. I have no further questions at this time.
The organization would like to ask an additional question.
Please.
So just for clarification, again, it was your testimony that your only involvement in looking for or interacting with Mr. Blanton was after the superintendent had requested your assistance. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. No further questions.
Thank you. Ms. Pantoja, I believe the union would like you to stay in the area, subject to recall. So again, please do not discuss these matters outside of this room, but at this time, you are excused. At this time, I think we need some further clarification on some testimony that I'm confused about. So I'm going to recall Mr. Lakin. I have a few follow-up questions for him. Does the company have a layoff procedure?
Yes, all he would have had to do is tell me he was sick, and we would have arranged for him to have some type of medical treatment.
Did Mr. Blanton lay off in the normal fashion?
No, he laid on a bench.
And let me ask you again for clarification. Was the office clean?
No, it was not.
Was the office significantly cleaner after Mr. Blanton had worked than it was before he started?
No, it was not.
And tell me again how long you had to look for Mr. Blanton before you found him?
It was over an hour and a half that we looked for him.
And to be clear, when you finally did find Mr. Blanton, did you find him in the process of cleaning offices and storerooms or switchmen's wash or locker rooms?
No, he was in the process of sleeping.
Did you find him maintaining or cleaning the grounds?
No, he was sleeping.
Did you find him keeping the engineers and switchmen's wash and locker rooms clean or maintained?
Once again, no, he was sleeping.
Did you find him handling any bags and mail at the passenger station?
Nope, sound asleep.
Did you find him replacing any posters at Davis Yard at passenger station?
No, when I found him, he was doing no work at all.
I believe that clarifies any follow-up questions I may have had for Mr. Lakin. Mr. Hollis?
Yes. Just a couple. So you were the preparer of the charges, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you chose to not include a charge of sleeping against Mr. Blanton, is that correct?
I chose to write the letter as you see it, the charge letter as you see it.
Okay, and the charge letter as I see it does not include the word sleeping, is that correct?
No, but I'm here today to provide that kind of testimony.
Okay. But just to be clear, the charge letter does not include the charge of sleeping, correct?
No, it does not.
Thank you. And you observed Mr. Blanton, it was your testimony that you observed him in the locker room, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And the janitor's position would be responsible for cleaning the locker room, is that correct?
Yes, to clean the locker room.
Okay. And you gave testimony that the locker room is in the back of the building.
Yes,
Okay. And that's also near the storeroom, is that correct?
yeah, it's relatively close to the storeroom, yes.
Okay. And the hearing officer asked you the question of, was the office cleaner after you observed Mr. Blanton than it was before the day that you called Mr. Blanton to work? And your testimony was no. So the question that I have for you is cleaning one particular office the only duty assigned to the janitor's position?
It's one of his duties, yes.
Is it the only duty?
Well, no, you've seen the bulletin. He had several duties.
Okay. And it's also, your testimony did not indicate, so I'll ask this question. You did not provide Mr. Blanton with a list of the order in which you expected duties to be performed, is that correct?
No, not in the order, but I gave him a list of everything I expected to be done.
And when you say you gave him a list, you're referring to the job bulletin? Is
That's
that-
correct.
Okay. All right, I don't have any other questions at this time, subject to recall.
Mr. Lakin, so to clarify then, the accused employee should have been in the storeroom.
Yes.
Should he have been laying down on a bench in the storeroom?
No, he should have been working.
And because he was not working, that caused you to issue charges for unsatisfactory work performance in the capacity as a janitor and failure to comply with written instructions.
Yes.
Thank you. At this time, I don't think we have any further questions. I believe you should remain in the area and not discuss any of this outside of this room, but at this time, you're excused.